Hi, my name is Sam Connerly, and I'm going to do my informative speech on the history of rock and roll. The great Neil Young once said, "Hey, hey, my, rock and roll will never die." 40 years later, those words remain true. Rock and roll, since its conception, has always persevered through each decade, always adapting and evolving. New artists are still carrying on the tradition set for them by bands of the past. The old works are also being preserved by the solid fans who are still blasting the headbanging anthems that have come to define the genre. Like Huey Lewis in the News once said, "The heart of rock and roll is still beating, even after all these years." So the question is, where did this wonderful culture come from? And that answer isn't easy, but it's the one I'm going to try to answer today. And it's a long, complicated one. But let's start with the 1950s. Rock and roll was born out of a mix between blues, country, and rhythm. These three ingredients came together in the 1950s. Rock became known for its rebellious and wild style that diverged from all previous music. The first legends of rock were Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, and of course, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. Elvis would set the precedent for rock legends to come by dominating the charts with his breakout album, Elvis Presley. According to biography.elvis.com, this became the first rock album to top the Billboard charts and it held the position for 10 weeks. Elvis would then go on to earn the title as the king of rock and roll. So rock was starting to become a mainstay in American culture, but it did receive a boost from artists coming from England in the form of the British invasion. Beatlemania was the name of the disease that was spreading rapidly across the country. According to Rolling Stone magazine, the Beatles single "I Want to Hold Your Hand" sold 250,000 copies in the US within 3 days of release. The Beatles were following in Elvis's footsteps by exciting the youth of America, but this time injecting a little more joy and happiness in lighter musical tones. The British invasion was also accompanied by bands like the Hollies and the Zombies, and of course my favorite, The Who. The 1970s was a crucial decade for rock as it saw it split into multiple subgenres that brought on some of the greatest rockers in history. First, there was the rise of disco through bands like the Bee Gees with Staying Alive, and the movie Saturday Night Fever starring John Travolta solidified the disco culture in dance clubs. The Village People also came along in this period. Pop music also saw a rise. It was similar to disco, but just a tad bit different, with bands like ABBA and Dancing Queen, and Neil Diamond with Sweet Caroline. There was soft rock music of Elton John and Billy Joel, punk rock of the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, and more introspective groups like Pink Floyd and Rush that had lyrics that were more designed to ask questions about human existence and go into the deeper questions of life. There were also more groups that had a hometown feeling that would form heartland rock, such as Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty. Finally, there was the hard rock bands like AC/DC, Bon Jovi, and Led Zeppelin. Rock was something that people were taking and mixing with their own personality with beautiful results. And one thing that was common between the 1960s and the 1970s was the Vietnam counterculture. You had bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival that had the Vietnam anthem Fortunate Son, and then you had other bands that would protest Vietnam with their music. Rock was a beautiful house that had a room specifically tailored for the different types of people who inhabited it. And it can be argued that while the 1950s was the beginning of rock and roll, the 1970s was the most crucial decade for its survival. And so then we get to the 1980s. The 1980s changed the name of the music game forever with the introduction of the MTV Music Channel that made music videos the next big thing. Songs would gain popularity based off how well their music videos would do, like Take On Me by a-ha. And these music videos, if they had a new, weird take on the music video type, it would become better for the song because it would stick in people's head easier. And rockers gained personas based off how much exposure they were getting on TV. They got iconic clothes and iconic looks. And the king of the 1980s was Michael Jackson, who blew the world away with his album Thriller. According to Rolling Stone, the title track's music video has been searched over 150 million times on YouTube. Michael left the childhood band Jackson 5 in order to pursue his own musical career by himself. Between hits like Billie Jean, PYT, Beat It, and many others, Jackson had 7 singles reach the top 10 on the charts. Michael Jackson's legacy would be defined by upbeat rhythms, outstanding dancing, and his ability to attack racial walls. And finally, in 1985, the greatest artists of the time would find themselves together in a recording studio to create the song for charity, We Are the World. Bruce Springsteen, Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, and many others would all contribute to this song to help relieve Africa. And in the 1990s, we started to see a darker turn for rock. There were bands like Metallica, who just released a hardcore song, Enter Sandman, which would be the catalyst for similar rock to follow. We would see the up and coming of the grunge movement with bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden. Grunge was a way for the teens of the decade to express their disgust towards the social constructs that they felt the singers of the country were imposing. And so where are we now? Well, it's hard to define where rock is because most of the bands today don't self-identify as rock bands. However, rock is still alive because it influences the music of today. Bands like Imagine Dragons have heart-rocking anthems that AC/DC had. And then you also have bands like the Lumineers with lyrics that would go along with Bruce Springsteen and John Mellencamp. Rock and roll is as prevalent today as it's ever been. And even though you don't see it as much these days, it's still out there. You just have to look. Thank you.